Chapter 91. How the Admiral cruised down the Costa de las Orejas to Cape Gracias a Dios and proceeded to Carrier, and what he did and saw there. The Admiral sailed along the Costa de las Orejas, eastward, as far as Cape Gracias a Dios, to which he gave that name because it took them 70 days of sailing to make the 60 leagues from Point Caxinas to that cape. Now tacking toward the sea and again toward land, often gaining with the wind, and as often losing, according to whether the wind was strong or weak, when they came about. If the coast had not had some good anchorages, it would have certainly have taken us much longer to make that distance. But as it was clean, and had 2 fathoms of depth half a league from shore, and the water rose 2 fathoms every league seaward, it was very easy to anchor at night or when the wind was slack, so that the course was navigable, though difficult. When we came up to the Cape on September 14th, seeing that the coast trended southerly, and that we could easily continue our voyage with the prevailing eastern winds that before had been so contrary to us, all gave thanks to God. That is why the Admiral gave it the name Gracias a Dios. A little way beyond, we passed among some perilous shoals that extended out to sea as far as the eye could reach. As we needed to take on water and wood, on Saturday, September 16th, the Admiral sent the ship's boats toward a river that seemed to be deep and easy of entrance. But as they came out, the wind having freshened from seaward and the sea become heavy, such a surf built up at the mouth that one boat was swamped and her crew drowned. For this reason, the Admiral named it Rio de Desastres. Along the banks of this river, and in the vicinity, there were canes as thick as a man's thigh. On Sunday, September 25th, we continued southward and anchored at an island named Chibayan, off a village on the mainland named Carrier. Here we found the best country and people that we had yet seen, because the land was high and abounded in rivers and great trees, and the island itself was very verdant, full of groves of lofty trees, palms, myrobalans, and many other species. For this reason the Admiral named it La Huerta. This island is a short league from a village called Carrier that lies near a river. To this village there came a great number of Indians of the vicinity, many armed with bows and arrows, others with palm tree spears black as pitch and hard as bone, and tipped with fish bones, and still others with macanas or clubs. They seemed determined to resist our landing. The men wore their hair braided about their heads, while the women wore theirs cut, as we do. Seeing that we came in peace, they appeared eager to trade their weapons, cotton cloaks and shirts, and guanine pendants which they hang about their necks, as we wear an Agnus Dei or other relic in exchange for our things. They swam out to the ships with all their goods, for the Christians did not go ashore that day or the next. The Admiral did not allow his people to accept any of their articles, since he wanted to show them that we did not covet their possessions. Instead, he ordered presents to be distributed among them. The less interest we showed in trade, the more they showed, inviting us ashore by making signs and holding up their cloaks like banners. At last, seeing we would not come, they left all the truck we had given them neatly tied together at the boat landing. There our men found it when they went ashore on Wednesday. Thinking that we distrusted them, the Indians sent aboard an old Indian of venerable presence, bearing a banner tied to a stick. 2 girls, one 8 and the other 14 years old, accompanied him. In response to his pleas, the Admiral sent a boat ashore for water, and the Christians were very careful to make no sign or gesture that might scare the Indians. When they were returning aboard, the Indians urged them by signs to take the girls, who had guanines about their necks. At the entreaties of the old man who had brought them, we agreed to let them come along. This stratagem reflected much intelligence on the part of those Indians, and the girls displayed much courage, for though the Christians were completely strange to them in aspect, manners, and race, they showed no fear or grief, but always looked pleasant and modest. On this account they were well treated by the Admiral, who caused them to be clothed and fed, and then sent them ashore, where the old man who had brought them and 50 more Indians came out to receive them with much rejoicing. When the boats went ashore again that day, they found the same people there with the girls, who, as the other Indians had done, returned all the things the Christians had given them. Next day, when the Adelantado went ashore to get what information he could about those 2 people, 2 principal men approached him at the boat landing, and each taking him by an arm, they sat down with him on the grass on the shore. When the Adelantado asked them questions and ordered the scribe to record their replies, the Indians were so terrified by the sight of the pen and paper that most of them ran away. The reason was that they were afraid of being bewitched by words or signs. Yet it was they who impressed us as being great sorcerers. For on approaching the Christians, they scattered a certain powder in the air. They also burned this powder in censers, and with these censers caused the smoke to go toward the Christians. The fact that they refused to take anything of ours was more evidence that they suspected us of being enchanters, confirming the adage that says a rogue sees himself in every other man. Sunday, October 2nd, after the ships had been careened and provided with all that the voyage required, the admiral sent the Adelantado ashore with some men to survey the country, and especially to learn of the Indians' dwellings, customs, and mode of life. The most remarkable thing they saw was this. In a large wooden palace roofed with canes were some tombs, and one of which was a corpse, dried and embalmed, and in another 2 more bodies, with no bad odor, wrapped in cotton cloth. Over each tomb was a tablet carved with figures of beasts, and on some the effigy of the dead man, adorned with many beads, guanines, and other things they most prize. Because these were the most intelligent Indians they had seen in those regions, the admiral caused some of them to be captured, that we might learn the secrets of that country. He selected 2 leading men from the 7 who were seized. The others he sent home with gifts, in order not to throw the country into an uproar. He told the captives that he needed them to guide him down the coast, after which he would set them free. They, however, thought he was holding them for ransom. The next day, many Indians came down to the shore and sent 4 emissaries to the flagship to treat for the ransom of those men. They offered various things and brought as a present 2 native wild boars that are small but very savage. The admiral admired the intelligence of those people, but this only made him more eager to learn what he could about them through an interpreter. He paid no heed to their offers, but ordered them paid for the boats and sent them home with gifts. One of these boars provided fine sport, as I shall now relate. Among the animals of that country there are certain cats of grayish color, the size of a small greyhound but with a longer tail, so strong that if one coils its tail about something, it holds it as tightly as if it were fastened with a rope. These animals move about in the trees like squirrels, leaping from tree to tree and grasping the branches not only with their claws, but also with their tails, by which they often hang for rest or for sport. A crossbowman brought one out of the forest that he had knocked down from a tree with a shaft, and because it was still so fierce that he dared not get near it, he cut off one of its legs with a knife. The sight of it scared a valiant dog we had aboard, but frightened even more one of those boars the Indians had brought, and it backed off in great fear. This surprised us, because hitherto it had run at everybody on deck, including the dog. The admiral then had boar and cat thrown together, whereupon the cat coiled his tail around the pig's snout, seized him by the neck with his remaining foreclaw, and bit him, so that he grunted with fear. From this we concluded that these cats hunt other animals, like the wolves and greyhounds of Spain. Chapter 92. How the admiral sailed from Carrier to Cerebero and Veragua, and thence to Portobello, all along a very fertile coast. Wednesday, October 5th, the admiral set sail and proceeded to Cerebero Bay, which is 6 leagues long and more than 3 wide. It is studded with islands and has 3 or 4 channels that are very convenient for getting in and out with every kind of wind. The ship sailed as if in streets between one island and another, the branches of the trees brushing the cordage of the ships. After we had anchored in this bay, a landing was made on one of these islands. The boat's people found 20 canoes beached on the shore, and encountered Indians who were as naked as they came from their mothers' wombs. Some wore only a gold mirror at the neck, and others a guanine eagle. They showed no fear, and with the aid of the Indian interpreter from Carrier, they traded a gold mirror weighing 10 ducats for 3 hawksbells. They said this gold was very abundant, and that they got it on the mainland, not far from there. Next day, October 7th, the boats were sent to the mainland, where they found 15 canoes filled with Indians. Because these Indians refused to sell their mirrors to us, 2 of their principal men were seized and brought before the admiral that they might inform him about their people with the aid of the interpreters from Carrier. One of them wore a gold mirror weighing 14 ducats, and another a gold eagle weighing 22. The Indians said that 1 or 2 days' journey inland much gold was found in certain places that they named. They said, too, that there were many fish in that bay, and ashore many of those animals that we had seen in Carrier, and many of the things the Indians eat, such as roots, grains, and fruit. The Indians are painted all over face and body in different colors, white, black, and red. They go completely naked, only covering their genitals with cotton clouts. From this bay of Cerebero we proceeded to another next to it, and quite like it, called Alborema. On the 17th of the same month, we put to sea and continued our voyage. On arrival at the Guayga, which is a river 12 leagues distant from Alborema, the admiral sent his boats ashore. As they approached, they saw over 100 Indians on the beach, and these rushed at them with fury, entering the water up to their waist, brandishing spears, blowing horns, beating a drum, splashing water toward the Christians and squirting toward them the juice of some herb that they were chewing. Our men sat quietly and finally succeeded in pacifying them, after which the Indians bartered the mirrors they wore about their necks for 2 or 3 hawksbells apiece. In this way we obtained 16 mirrors of pure gold worth 150 ducats. Next day, Friday, October 21st, the boats again went ashore to trade, but before landing, the Christians called out to some Indians who were lurking on the beach behind some shelters that they had built during the night from fear of an attack by the Christians. The Indians would not come out, nor would our men land without assurance of a friendly reception on their part, for, as was later learned, they planned to assault the Christians if they made a landing. On seeing that our men would not leave the boats, they began to sound horns and drum, and with ferocious yells rushed into the water as they had done the day before, threatening by signs to hurl their spears if our men did not return to the ships. These actions angered our men, and in order to teach the Indians a lesson, they wounded one Indian in the arm with an arrow, and fired a lombard which so frightened them that they fled in confusion. Then 4 Christians landed, and after they had again called out to the Indians, the latter laid down their arms and came toward our men very peacefully. They traded 3 mirrors and said they had not brought any more, because they had come prepared to fight, and not to trade. As the Admiral had no other end in view on this voyage than to gain information, without further delay, he took the shortest route to Catawba, and anchored in the mouth of a great river. They could see the natives of that place assembling to the sound of horn and drum, and presently a canoe containing 2 men came out to the flagship. After they had spoken with the Indian interpreter from Carrier, they came aboard without signs of fear. On the advice of the interpreter, they gave the Admiral 2 gold mirrors they had about their necks, and the Admiral presented them with some of our truck. Immediately after they had returned ashore, another canoe containing 3 men came out. These traded their gold mirrors, as the others had done. After gaining their friendship, our men went ashore, where they found many people with their king. He was dressed like the others, but was protected from the drenching rain by a huge leaf. By way of example to his subjects, he traded a mirror and bid them trade theirs. The Christians obtained a total of 19 mirrors of fine gold. This was the first place in the Indies where the Christians saw signs of a building. It was a great mass of stucco, and appeared to have been made of stone and lime. The Admiral ordered a piece to be taken as a souvenir of that antiquity. From there he continued eastward, and came to Cabrova. The villages of that province lie on the banks of its rivers. As the people did not come down to the shore and the wind was fresh, he held on his course, and came to 5 villages of active trade. One of them was Veragua, where according to the Indians gold was found, and the mirrors were made. The next day he came to a village named Cubiga. This, said the Indian from Carrier, marked the end of the trading country that extended for 50 leagues along the coast, from Cerebero to Cubiga. The Admiral made no stop there, but continued on his course till he entered the harbor of Portobello. He gave it that name because it was very large, beautiful, thickly populated, and surrounded by cultivated country. He entered it on November 2nd, passing between 2 small islands. Within the harbor, vessels may lie close to shore, and beat out if they wish. The country about the harbor is well tilled, and full of houses only a stone's throw or crossbow shot apart. All as pretty as a picture, the fairest thing one ever saw. During the 7 days that we were detained there by rain and foul weather, canoes came from all about to barter all sorts of food and skeins of fine-spun cotton for trifles of brass, such as lace points and tags. Chapter 93. How the Admiral came to the Puerto de Bastimentos, en nombre de Dios, and how he held on his course till he put in the harbor of Retrete. Wednesday, November 9th, we left Portobello and sailed 8 leagues eastward, but the next day were forced back 4 by a contrary wind, and so put in among some islets near the mainland where Nombre de Dios now is. Because all the land about and the islets were full of maize fields, the Admiral named it Puerto de Bastimentos. In this harbor one of our boats hailed a canoe of Indians. They, thinking our people meant them harm, and seeing the boat only a stone's throw away, cast themselves into the water and tried to escape by swimming, and no matter how hard our men rowed, they could not catch them over the half-league that the chase continued. When they caught up with one, he would dive like a waterfowl and come up a bowshot or 2 distant. It was really funny to see the boat giving chase, and the rowers wearing themselves out in vain, for they finally had to return empty-handed. We remained there until November 23rd, repairing the ships and mending our casks. Then we sailed eastward to a place called Guayga, which is also the name of another place situated between Veragua and Seguare. When the boats went ashore, they met a crowd of more than 300 Indians, who wanted to barter eatables and some gold pendants that hung from their ears and noses. We did not tarry there, and on Saturday, November 26th, we put in a little harbor that the admiral named the Retrete, because it was so small that it would not hold more than 5 or 6 ships. The entrance was only 75 to 100 feet wide, with rocks as sharp as the points of a diamond, sticking up on either side. But the channel was so deep in the middle that if you drew a little closer to one side than the other on entering, you could jump ashore on the rocks. This it was that saved the ships from destruction, for the boats sent to sound the harbor before the ships put in lied about its width. So eager were they to go ashore to trade. If the Indians had wanted to attack us, they could have done so in that narrow channel. In this harbor we stayed 9 days, with miserable weather. At first the Indians came peacefully to trade, but later, when they saw the sailors sneaking ashore from the ships, they withdrew to their huts. For the sailors, a greedy and dissolute set of men, committed innumerable outrages. This provoked the Indians to break the peace, and some fights occurred between the two sides. The Indians gathered in growing numbers about the ships, which lay alongside the shore, and evidently intended to do some harm. The admiral tried to placate them by patience and civility, but at last, perceiving their arrogance, he sought to strike terror in them by causing some pieces of artillery to be fired. To this thunder they responded with shouts, beating the branches of the trees with staves, and uttering great threats to show they did not fear that noise, for they really believed that it was only meant to scare them. In order to temper their pride and teach them not to scorn the Christians, the admiral ordered a shot fired at a group of Indians on a hilltop, and the ball, falling in their midst, let them know that this thunder concealed a thunderbolt. After that, they hardly dared peep out at us from behind the hills. The people of this country were the best favored Indians the Christians had yet seen, being tall and spare, not pot-bellied, and handsome of face. The land was covered with small plants, but there were few trees. In the harbor there were large lizards, or crocodiles, that came out to sleep ashore and give out an odor as strong as if all the musk in the world were collected together. They are so ravenous and cruel that if they find a man asleep, they will drag him into the water to eat him, but they are cowardly and flee when attacked. These lizards are found in many other parts of the mainland. Some say they are crocodiles like those of the Nile. Chapter 94. How the admiral, harried by storms, again stood eastward to get information about the mines of Veragua. Monday, December 5th, the admiral, perceiving that the violence of the east and northeast winds did not abate, and that no trade could be carried on with these people, decided to turn back and verify what the Indians had said about the mines of Veragua. He slept that night at Portobello, 10 leagues to westward. The next day, as he was continuing on his course, the wind changed to the west again. But thinking that it would not last, he decided to alter course, but bear up against the wind for a few days. Never was seen more unsettled weather. Now the wind was fair for Veragua, now it whipped about and drove us back to Portobello. And just as we were most hopeful of making port, the wind would change again, sometimes with such terrible thunder and lightning that the men dared not open their eyes. And it seemed the ships were sinking and the heavens coming down. Sometimes the thunder lasted so long that we were sure some ship of the fleet was firing signals for help. At other times there fell such a storm of rain that it poured torrents like another deluge. All suffered greatly and were in despair, for they could not get even half an hour's rest, being wet through for days on end, sometimes running one way and sometimes another, struggling with all the elements and dreading them all. In such terrible storms they dread the fire and the lightning flashes, the air for its fury, the water for the waves, and the land for the reefs and rocks of that unknown coast, which sometimes rears up at a man near the port where he hopes to find shelter, and not knowing the entrance, he chooses rather to contend with the other elements. Besides these different tears, there befell one no less dangerous and wonderful, a waterspout that on Tuesday, December 13th, passed between two ships. Had the sailors not dissolved it by reciting the gospel according to St. John, it would surely have swamped anything it struck, for it raises the water up to the clouds in a column thicker than a water butt, twisting it about like a whirlwind. That night we lost sight of the Vizcaya, but fortunately sighted her again after 3 very dark and dangerous days, during which time she lost her boat, and once anchored near land but had to cut her cable. On that occasion it was noted that the currents along that coast always run with the wind, east with a west wind, west with a wind from the east, and again flowing in the opposite direction when the wind changes. After such troubles of wind and sea, after the fleet had been half destroyed by the battering storm, with the men's sufferings so great as not to be borne, we had 2 days, of calm, during which so many sharks surrounded the ship that it was frightening, especially to those who believe in omens. For just as some say that vultures recognize the presence of a corpse by its smell many leagues away, so some believe that sharks have the same divinatory power. These beasts seize a person's leg or arm with their teeth and cut it off as clean as if with a knife. Because they have 2 files of saw-like teeth, we made carnage among them with a chain hook until we could kill no more, and they still followed us making turns in the water. So voracious are these beasts that not only will they eat carrion, but one can catch them by simply attaching a piece of red cloth to the hook. Out of one shark's belly I saw a turtle taken, that afterward lived in the ship. From another they took a whole shark's head that we had cut off and thrown into the water because the head, unlike the rest of the body, is not good to eat. It may seem strange that an animal should be able to swallow the head of another of the same size, but their heads are very elongated, and the mouth extends almost to the middle of the belly. Some viewed it as an evil omen, and others thought it poor fishing, but all did shark the honor of eating it, for by that time we had been over 8 months at sea and had consumed all the meat and fish that we had brought from Spain. And what with the heat and the dampness, even the biscuit was so full of worms that, God help me, I saw many wait until nightfall to eat the porridge made of it, so as not to see the worms. Others were so used to eating them that they did not bother to pick them out, for they might lose their supper by being so fastidious. Saturday, the 17th, the admiral put in a port that the Indians called Huiva, 3 leagues east of the Peñon. In this harbor, resembling a great channel, we rested for 3 days. When we went ashore, we found that the people here lived in the tops of trees, like birds. Their cabins or huts were built over frames of poles placed across branches. We could not learn the reason for this strange custom, but judged that it was caused by their fear of the griffins that inhabit that country, or of their enemies, because along that whole coast, each league apart, the people have great feuds. The 20th of the same month, we left this harbor with fair but unsettled weather, for hardly had we put out to sea when the winds and storms returned to vex us, so that we were forced to enter another harbor, which we left 3 days later, when signs of better weather appeared. But the weather, like an enemy that lies in wait for a man, suddenly attacked us with such fury that it drove us almost to the Peñon, when, as we were hoping to enter the harbor where we had first taken refuge, the wind whipped about so violently that it blew us into the harbor where we had been on Thursday, December 12th. There we stayed from the 2nd day of Christmas until January 3rd, 1503. After we had repaired the Galaga and taken on much maize, water, and wood, we again steered for Veragua, with foul weather and contrary winds that actually grew worse each time the admiral altered his course. So strange and unheard of a thing was this that I would not have believed it if I had not been there, and had not read the account of it by Diego Mendez, he who sailed in a canoe from Jamaica to Hispaniola, as will presently be told. And in the letter sent by the admiral to the Catholic sovereigns that has since been printed, the reader may read how much we suffered and how fortune persecuted him who most merited its favor. I return to the troubles and changes of wind and weather that caused us so much suffering between Veragua and Portobello, which is the reason that coast was afterward called La Costa de las Contrastas. On Thursday, it being the Feast of the Epiphany, we anchored near a river that the Indians called Yebra, and the admiral named Belén after that day, it being the Feast of the 3 Kings. He sent boats to sound the bar of that river, and of another farther west that the Indians called the Veragua, and found the entrance of the Veragua very shallow, with 4 fathoms of water on the Belén bar at high tide. So, the boats went up the Rio Belén, to a village where the Christians were told the gold mines were in Veragua, though at first the Indians would not speak them, and even gathered with their weapons, as if determined to prevent their landing. The next day the boats ascended the Rio Veragua to the village of Veragua, and received the same treatment from the Indians, for they prepared to fight us not only on land but on the water, from their canoes. But an Indian of that coast who had sailed some time with the Christians, and understood a little of their language, told the others that we were good people, and would not take anything without payment. Then they quieted down somewhat. They bartered 20 gold mirrors, some quills of gold dust, and gold nuggets. They tried to enhance the value by saying the gold came from far-off rugged mountains, and that during the time they collected it they could not eat or have the company of their wives. The Indians of Hispaniola at the time of its discovery also had those customs, according to their own account. Chapter 95. Now the admiral's ships went up the Rio Belén, where he determined to found a town and leave his brother the Adelantado in charge. Monday, January 9th, the admiral's flagship and the Vizcaya crossed the bar of the Rio Belén, and the Indians immediately came to barter their commodities, especially fish, which at a certain season entered that river from the sea. An incredible thing to one who has not seen it. They also exchanged a little gold for pins and larger quantities for strings of beads and hawksbells. The other two ships, which had missed flood tide that day, though even at highest tide the water does not rise there more than half a fathom, passed over on the 10th. Because the mines and wealth of Veragua enjoyed great fame, on the 3rd day after our arrival, the Adelantado took the boats down the coast and ascended the river to the village of the Chibayan, which is the name those Indians give to their king. When he learned of the Adelantado's coming, he came downstream with his canoes to meet him. They treated each other with much friendship and civility, each giving the other the things he most prized. And after they had conversed for a long while, the Adelantado and the Chibayan each went their own way, very peacefully. Next day the Chibayan came aboard the flagship to visit the admiral, and after they had talked for over an hour, the admiral gave him some things, and his men bartered some gold for hawksbells. Then the Chibayan returned without ceremony, the same way he had come. On Tuesday, January 24th, while we felt very easy and secure, the Rio Belén suddenly flooded, so that before we could prepare for it or run a hawser ashore, the fury of the water struck the flagship with such force that she broke one of the two cables and drove with such impetus against the Galaga, which lay astern, that the blow carried away her Bonaventure mizzen. Then, fouling one another, they drifted so as to be in great peril of going down with all hands. Some thought this flood was caused by the great rains which fell incessantly that winter throughout the land. But if that had been the case, the water would have risen little by little, and not so fast and furiously. We therefore suspected that a great shower had fallen on the mountains of Veragua. To these the admiral gave the name San Cristobal, because the summit of the highest mountain towers up into the region of the air, above the clouds, where weather changes originate. This summit has the appearance of a hermitage, and lies at least 20 leagues inland among very dense woods. The flood was very dangerous, for though it made it possible for the ships to go out to sea, which was half a mile distant, so violent a storm raged there that the fleet would have been shattered to pieces at the mouth of the river. While this storm lasted, we could not secure or lash down the ships, and the waves broke with such fury on the bar of the river that the boats could not go out to explore the coast in search of mines and a suitable site for a town. The admiral had decided to leave the Adelantado and most of his people here to settle and conquer the land while he returned to Spain for reinforcements and supplies. Monday, February 6th, the weather being calm, the Adelantado, with 68 men, rowed down the coast to the mouth of the Rio Veragua, a league to the west of the Belén, and then went up the river to the Cacique's village, where they passed the day getting information about the way to the mines. The Wednesday following, they marched 4.5 leagues and passed the night near a river, which they had crossed 43 times. Next day, after marching 1.5 leagues with guides provided by the Chibayan, they reached the mines. Within 2 hours after arrival, each had collected some gold among the roots of the trees, which are very luxuriant there and tower to the skies. They were much pleased with their finds, as none of them had any digging tools or had ever looked for gold before. As their journey had no other aim than to gain information about the mines, they went back very content to Veragua, where they slept that night and next day returned to the ships. We later learned that these were not the mines of Veragua, which are near, but those of Arira, because the people of Arira were at war with the Veraguans. The Chibayan had guided the Christians thither in order to annoy his enemies, and in the hope that the Christians would go to that country and quit his own. Chapter 96. How the Adelantado visited some towns in that province, and of the things and manners of the people of that country. Thursday, February 16th. 1503, the Adelantado went overland up the coast with 59 persons, a boat following with 14 more. The next morning they reached the Rio Araiba, which is 7 leagues west of the Belén. When they were 1 league from the village, the Cacique, accompanied by 20 Indians, came out to meet the Adelantado and presented him with food. The Indians also bartered some gold mirrors. All the time they were there, the Cacique and his leading men never stopped chewing a dry herb. Sometimes they also put in their mouths a powder that they carried, together with a dry herb. It seemed a dirty habit. Presently they went to the village, where many people came out to meet them. They assigned the Christians a hut to lodge in and gave them much food. Shortly, the Cacique of Dururi, a neighboring village of many Indians, called on them, bringing some mirrors to trade. From these Indians they learned that in the interior there were many Caciques who had much gold, and warriors armed like ourselves. Next day, the Adelantado sent most of his men overland, back to the ships, while he continued with 30 men to a village called Cobrava, where were cornfields stretching over an extent of 6 leagues. And then he proceeded to Catawba. In both places they met a friendly reception, and were given much food. They also got by trade some gold mirrors like the paten of a chalice, each weighing 12 ducats more or less. These they wear hanging by a string about their necks, as we do in Agnus Dei or other relic. Being now a great distance from the ships and not finding along that whole coast a harbor, or river larger than the Belén on which to found a town, on February 24th he returned by the same route he had come, with many ducats worth of gold obtained by trade. On his return he began diligently to work on the founding of the new town, and the 80 men who were staying, having formed into groups of about 10 men apiece, set about building houses on the banks of the Rio Belén, about a larboard shot from its mouth, beyond a gully that comes down to the river, at the foot of which there is a little hill. Besides these houses, which were of timber and thatched with the leaves of palm trees that grow on the shore, they built a large house for use as a storehouse and arsenal, in which they placed many pieces of ordnance, powder, and foodstuffs, but the necessities of life, such as wine, biscuit, garlic, vinegar, and cheese, being all the Spanish food they had, they stored for greater security aboard the Galaga, which the admiral intended to leave for the Adelantado's use. He also left all the fishing equipment, such as nets and hooks, because all the rivers of that country swarm with fish. At certain times of the year, various kinds of fish come in shoals up the rivers and to the seashore. These fish are the main food of the Indians, since the animals of that country are not numerous enough to live on. These Indians have much the same customs as those of Hispaniola and the neighboring islands, with these differences. The natives of Veragua and its vicinity turn their backs when they speak to each other, and even while eating they are always chewing a herb. We decided that must be the cause of their rotten teeth. Their main food is fish, which they catch in nets, and on hooks cut or rather sawed out of tortoise shell with pita thread. They have the same practice on the other islands. They had another way of catching small fish, like those called titi of Hispaniola. These fish swim close to shore during the rainy season, and are so fiercely pursued by the larger fish that they rise to the surface, and then the Indians catch them in small nets and mats. They wrap them in leaves as apothecaries roll electuaries in paper, and after being dried in an oven, the fish keep for a long time. They catch sardines in a similar way, for at certain seasons, the sardines, fleeing from larger fish, jump 10 or 15 feet out of the water onto the beach, and all the Indians have to do is gather them up. They have another way of catching sardines. First, they set a palm leaf partition about 54 inches high in the middle of the canoe, from stem to stern. Then they row down the river, making a great din and striking the side of the canoe with their paddles. The sardines, trying to save themselves from the larger fish that pursue them, leap toward the canoe, hit the partition, and fall in. In this way they catch all they please. Juro, shad, and even skate, as well as other kinds of fish, come here at certain seasons. It is truly wonderful to see how they swarm in these rivers at the time of their migrations. The Indians catch great quantities of them, and after being dried, they keep for a long time. The Indians also eat much maize, which is a grain that, like millet, grows to a tassel, or ear. From this they make white and red wine, in the same way that beer is made in England, adding spices according to taste. Then it has a pleasant flavor, resembling that of sour wine. They make another wine from the juice of a tree that I believe to be a palm, although it has a smooth bark like other trees, and the trunk bears thorns as long as the spines of the porcupine. From the heart of this palm, or palmetto, they extract juice by scraping and squeezing, which juice they boil with water and spices. This wine they greatly prize. They make still another kind of wine from a fruit that we had already seen on the island of Guadalupe, and that resembles a large pineapple. They cultivate it in extensive fields, planting the shoots that grow out of the top of the pineapple, as we do with lettuce. This plant lives for 3 or 4 years, bearing fruit all the while. They also make wine from other kinds of fruit, especially one that grows on very high trees, as large as cedars. Each fruit has 2, 3, or 4 kernels in the shape of nuts. They are not round, however, but like the garlic, or chestnut. The rind of this fruit is like that of the pomegranate, and it resembles the pomegranate exactly when taken from the tree, save that it has no corona. Its taste is like that of the peach, or a very good pear. Some specimens are better than others, as happens with other fruit. This fruit is also found on the islands, where the Indians call it mame. Chapter 97. how the Chibayan and many leading Indians were made prisoners to ensure the security of the Christian town, and how the Chibayan made his escape through the carelessness of his guards. When the affairs of the settlement had been put in order, with 10 or 12 houses put up and thatched with palm leaves, the admiral prepared to depart for Spain, but the river, which had before placed us in grave peril by its flooding, now placed us in even worse plight by a sharp drop in its water level. The reason was that the January rains having ceased, the mouth of the river became so choked up with sand that instead of 4 fathoms, which had barely permitted our entrance, there was only half a fathom of water over the bar. We thus found ourselves trapped and without hope of relief, for it was impossible to haul the ships over the sand. And even had we had the equipment to do it, never was the sea so quiet but that the least wave could break a ship to pieces against the shore, especially ships like ours that were already like honeycombs, riddled through and through by the shipworm. So we commended ourselves to God and asked him to send us rain, as before we had prayed for fair weather, for we knew that rain would swell the river and open up the bar, this being customary in those rivers. At this time we learned through the interpreter that the Chibayan planned to set fire to the houses and kill all the Christians, the Indians being greatly offended that we had settled on that river. It was decided to teach him a lesson and strike fear into his neighbors by taking him and all his leading men prisoners and sending them to Castile, and to make his people serve the Christians. Accordingly, on March 30th, 1503, the Adelantado set out with 74 men for the village of Veragua. I call it a village, but be it noted that the houses are not together, for the people of that country, like those of Biscay, live apart from each other. When the Chibayan learned that the Adelantado was coming, he sent word he must not come to his house, which was pitched on a hill above the Rio Veragua. The Adelantado did not want him to flee, so he decided to come with only 5 men. However, he ordered the others to follow by 2s, each pair a certain distance apart from the other. Having come within a musket shot of the house, they were to surround it and allow no one to escape. When he was quite near, the Chibayan sent word that the Adelantado must not enter his house, that although suffering from an arrow wound, he himself would come out to speak with him. He did this to keep the Christians from seeing his wives, for the Indians are very jealous. So he came out and sat down in the doorway, saying none but the Adelantado might approach. And this the Adelantado did, telling the other Christians to attack as soon as he had grasped the Chibayan by the arm. The Adelantado walked up to the cacique and inquired about his wound and other matters through an Indian interpreter, whom we had captured in those parts 3 months before, and who now chose to stay with us. This Indian was much concerned for our safety, for he knew that the Chibayan planned to kill the Christians. The Chibayan did not appreciate the extent of our power, and counted on the great number of men at his orders to ensure the success of his design. But the Adelantado felt no fear. Pretending he wished to see the Chibayan's wound, he seized him by the arm, and though the Chibayan was a strong man, he managed to hold him until the 4 other Christians ran up and made him captive. Thereupon the 5th man fired off his gun, and all the Christians rushed out of their ambush and surrounded the house. Inside they found 50 people, most of whom they captured without inflicting a single wound, because seeing their king made a prisoner, they offered no resistance. Among them were some of the Chibayan's wives and children, and other leading Indians. These offered a rich ransom for their freedom, saying they would give us a great treasure that was hidden in a nearby wood. But the Adelantado paid no heed to their promises, and decided to send the Chibayan, his wife, and the leading Indians aboard ship before the Indians of the vicinity could gather, with himself and most of his men staying to mop up the Chibayan's subjects and relations who had escaped. After some discussion as to who should take the prisoners to the mouth of the river, the job was assigned to Juan Sanchez of Cadiz, chief pilot of the fleet and a highly regarded man, who offered to take the cacique bound hand and foot. The Adelantado warned him not to let the Chibayan escape, and he replied he would permit the hairs of his beard to be plucked out one by one if the cacique got away. So he set out down the river with the cacique. About half a league from the mouth, the Chibayan complained his bonds were hurting him, and out of pity, Juan Sanchez untied all the ropes but one that he held in his hand. Soon after, observing that Juan Sanchez was somewhat abstracted, the Chibayan jumped overboard, and Juan Sanchez had to let the rope go in order not to be drawn in after him. By this time it was dark, and the other prisoners made such a racket that the Christians could neither see nor hear the cacique swim ashore, and he vanished like a stone fallen in water. Fearing the others might attempt to escape, they continued their way toward the fleet, much chagrined by the result of their carelessness. Next day, April 1st, Perceiving that the country was mountainous, densely wooded, and devoid of villages, with only a hut here and there, and that they might have difficulty getting home safely if attacked, the Adelantado gave up the pursuit and returned to the fleet without the loss of a single man killed or wounded. He presented the admiral with about 300 ducats worth of booty and gold mirrors and eagles, gold twists that the Indians wear around their arms and legs, and gold cords that they wear about their heads in the manner of coronets. After the Christians had deducted the royal fifth, they divided the rest among the members of the expedition, giving the Adelantado one of the aforesaid crowns as a token of victory. Chapter 98. Now after the admiral had sailed from Belén for Castile, the Chibayan attacked the Christian town, in which combat there were many dead and wounded. After the admiral had done all that was necessary for the proper support and administration of the town, God was pleased to send heavy rain that swelled the river and raised the water on the bar so the ships could go out. Therefore, the admiral decided to leave immediately for Hispaniola with 3 ships, in order to be able to send help to the settlement as quickly as possible. We waited for calm weather, so that the sea should not break or beat on the bar, then took the caravels out, the ship's boats going in front. For all our care, the ships dragged their keels on the sandy bottom, and had it not been shifting sand, even with good weather, the ships would have been in great peril of destruction. We then quickly loaded the ships with the ballast that had been taken off to lighten them while crossing the bar. When we reached the open coast, a league from the mouth of the river, and were about to depart, God put it into the admiral's mind to send the flagship's boat ashore, to take on a supply of water and some other necessary things, whereby the boat was lost, but many men were saved both on land and sea. When the Indians and the Chibayan perceived the caravels had sailed, and we could not help the men who remained behind, they attacked the Christian town at the very time the ship's boat was approaching the shore. The dense woods allowed the Indians to creep up unobserved to within 50 feet of the huts. They attacked with loud cries, hurling darts at every Christian they saw, and through the wattles of the huts, by which they wounded several. The Adelantado first seized a lance, and followed by 7 or 8 others, boldly charged the Indians, forcing them to retreat to the force that boarded the huts. Thence they sallied to hurl their darts, and retreated again, as Spaniards do in the game of jousts. At last, more Christians having joined the fight, and the Indians being punished by the edge of the sword, and by a dog who pursued them furiously, they fled, leaving 1 Christian dead and 7 wounded, one being the Adelantado, who received a dart wound in the chest. 2 Christians kept out of harm's way. I tell the story of these 2 to show the rascality of the one, an Italian from Lombardy, and the Castilian severity of the other. As the Lombard named Bastiano was running at a great pace to take refuge in a hut, Diego Mendez called out to him, "Turn back, Bastiano! Where are you going?" He replied, "Let me alone, damn it! I'm running to save my hide!" The Spaniard was Captain Diego Tristan, who had been sent ashore by the admiral as told above, but who remained in the boat during the entire duration of the fight, although he was near the river where it was taking place. Asked by him why he did not help the Christians, for which some reproved him, he replied that if he had rowed ashore, the Christians might have rushed in a panic for the safety of the boat, swamping it, and causing the destruction of all, since if the boat were lost, the admiral would run great danger at sea. Besides, said Tristan, his orders were to obtain water, and he would do nothing more, at least not until our men were in sore need. When the fight was over, he rowed upstream for fresh water, intending to return immediately to give the admiral an account of what had happened. He was warned not to go because of the great danger from Indians. He replied he had his orders and could take care of himself. So he continued upstream to where the river turns very narrow and dark, lined with such heavy foliage on both banks that it is almost impossible to go ashore, save in a few places where fishermen's trails end and the Indians beach their canoes. When he was about a league upstream, the Indians sallied from the densest part of this foliage in their canoes with loud cries and blowing on horns, and attacked Tristan from all sides. They possessed a great advantage, because their canoes are very light, especially the smaller fishing canoes holding 3 or 4 men, so that one could paddle while the others hurled darts and spears. I call them spears, but they are really pieces of wood, tipped with fish bones rather than iron. The ship's boat held 7 oarsmen, as well as the captain and 2 or 3 soldiers more. But as they could not protect the rowers from the rain of darts, the rowers soon had to lay down their oars and take up their shields. So great a number of Indians beset them from all sides, darting up in their canoes and retreating when they pleased, that soon they had wounded most of the Christians, and especially the captain, on whom they inflicted many wounds. He remained undaunted to the end, and boldly urged on the others, but it was no use, for they hemmed them in so that they could not move or use their muskets. They finally killed Tristan with a spear stroke through the eye, and all the others except a cooper from Seville named Juan de Noya. He, by great good fortune, fell in the water in the thick of the fight, and by swimming underwater reached the bank unobserved by the Indians, and escaped through the woods to bring the news to the town. At this news our men were beside themselves with fear, for they saw themselves so few and many of their comrades dead and others wounded, and as the admiral was at sea without a boat and unable to send them aid, they resolved to leave that place immediately. They would have done this, too, in disorderly, mutinous fashion, if not prevented by the closing of the river through the onset of bad weather. As a result, they could not take out the caravel that had been left for their use. They could not even send a boat to inform the admiral of what had happened, because the sea broke so heavily on the bar. The admiral's plight was equally grave, for he was anchored in an open roadstead without a boat, and with crews sadly reduced by losses in battle. Therefore he and all the rest of us were as troubled and perplexed as the men ashore. They, observing the issue of the fight, and seeing the corpses of Diego Tristan and his men floating downstream, covered with wounds and attended by croaking carrion crows, regarded all this as an evil omen, and feared they would come to the same end, especially as the Indians were flushed with their victory, and gave the settlement not a moment's peace because of its very vulnerable situation. Their affairs would have turned out even worse if they had not wisely decided to move to a large cleared space on the eastern bank of the river, where they constructed a rampart with casks and other materials, planting artillery pieces at strategic places. Thus they kept their enemies at bay, for the Indians dared not leave the shelter of the woods because of the great havoc the cannonballs did among them. Chapter 99. How the Indian captives aboard the Bermuda escaped, and the admiral learned of the defeat he had suffered on land. While these events were taking place ashore, the admiral spent 10 days in anguished waiting for the weather to clear, so he could send another boat to learn the reason for the first boat's delay in returning, though he had already suspected what had happened. But fortune was unkind in this, as in all else. We could not learn what had happened to the people in the settlement, nor could they learn what had happened to us. To add to our difficulties, some of the Chibayan's children and relations, who were prisoners on the Bermuda, managed to escape. At night they were confined below deck, but one evening some sailors who wished to sleep on the hatch and thought the hatch cover was too high for the prisoners to reach, failed to secure it with chains. Some of the captives heaped up ballast below, then, standing on the pile of stones, they forced the hatch open with their shoulders, tumbling the sleepy sailors on the deck. And before the noise had attracted other seamen, some of the principal prisoners had climbed out and leaped overboard. The sailors then secured the hatch with a chain and set about keeping better watch. The remaining captives were filled with despair because they had not escaped with their comrades. The next morning was found they had hanged themselves to the deck beams with such ropes as they could find, bending their knees because they had not enough headroom to hang themselves properly. Their death was no great loss to us of the fleet, but seriously worsened the plight of the men ashore. The Chibayan would gladly have made peace for the return of his children, but now that we no longer had hostages, there was reason to fear he would wage even crueler war on the town. In the midst of these misfortunes and vexations, with our lives hanging by the anchor cables, and ourselves completely in the dark on the state of affairs ashore, some seamen volunteered to swim ashore if the boat took them to where the water broke. This was the Bermuda's boat, for the Viscayans had been lost in the fight. It was the only boat that remained to the fleet. The admiral accepted their offer, and the boat carried them to within a musket shot of land. Closer they could not come because of the waves that broke on the beach. There Pedro de la Desma, a pilot from Seville, boldly leaped overboard and swam across the bar to the settlement. There he learned that the garrison to a man refused to stay in that hopeless situation. They begged the admiral to take them aboard, for to leave them behind was to condemn them to death. Moreover, there were stirrings of mutiny among them, with some refusing to obey the adelantado or the captains, and only awaiting a break in the weather to go off by themselves in canoe, since their single boat could not take them all. They said if the admiral did not take them aboard, they would risk their lives in this way, rather than wait for death at the hands of those cruel butchers, the Indians. Ledesma returned with this reply to the waiting boat, and then to the fleet, where he related to the admiral all that had happened. Chapter 100. How the admiral took aboard the men he had left in Belén, and how he proceeded to Jamaica. When the admiral learned of the defeat suffered by those men, and how discontented and dejected they were, he decided to wait for a turn in the weather, and take them aboard. He had to do this with great danger to himself, because he was lying off the coast with no possibility of saving them or himself if the weather grew worse. But it pleased God that after 8 days during which we were at the mercy of the prow cables, the weather so improved that the garrison could begin to transport themselves and their gear over the bar. using their single boat and 2 large canoes lashed together so as not to overturn. None wished to be among the last to come aboard, and in 2 days nothing remained ashore except the worm-eaten hulk of the Gallica. Rejoicing that we were reunited at last, we set sail eastward along that coast. Only the Admiral and the Adelantado knew that it was necessary to sail a good space along the coast before crossing the sea that lies between the mainland and Hispaniola. This decision caused much grumbling among the seamen, for they thought the Admiral intended to sail a direct route to Spain with unfit and ill-provisioned ships. We held on our course till we reached Portobello. There we had to abandon the Vizcaya because she was drawing much water and because her planking was completely riddled by the shipworm. Following the coast, we sailed on beyond Retrete, in a country near which there were many islands that the Admiral named Las Barbas. The Indians and the pilots, however, called it the land of the Cacique Pocorosa. Going on, we reached a headland that the Admiral named Marmoreo, and which is 10 leagues beyond Las Barbas. Monday, May 1st, 1503, we stood to the northward with winds and currents easterly, always endeavoring to sail as close to the wind as possible. All the pilots insisted that we had passed eastward of the Caribbee Islands, but the Admiral feared he would not be able to fetch Hispaniola. So it turned out, because Wednesday, May 10th, we sighted 2 very small low islands full of turtles, as was all the sea thereabout, so that it seemed to be full of little rocks. That is why these islands were called Las Tortugas. Passing northward by them, we arrived on Friday afternoon at the Jardín de la Reina, which is a great number of small islands on the south side of Cuba. As we lay here at anchor, 10 leagues from Cuba, suffering greatly from hunger because we had nothing to eat but biscuit and a little oil and vinegar, and exhausted by working 3 pumps day and night to keep the vessels afloat, for they were ready to sink from the multitude of holes made by the shipworm, there came on at night a great storm in which the Bermuda, being unable to ride it out, fouled us and broke our stem, nor did she get off whole, but smashed her stern almost to the helm. With great labor, on account of the heavy rain and high wind, by God's favor, the ships got clear of each other, and although we let go all the cables and anchors we had, none held but the ship's sheet anchor. The next morning we found intact but 1 strand of her cable, which must have parted if the night had lasted 1 hour longer. And since that place was full of rocks, we could not have avoided running on some of those astern of us. But it pleased God to deliver us then, as he had delivered us from many other dangers. Departing from there with much labor, we put in an Indian village on the coast of Cuba called Macaca. And having obtained some refreshment there, we stood over toward Jamaica, because the easterly winds and the strong westward running currents would have never let us make Hispaniola, especially since the ships were so riddled by the shipworm that day and night we never ceased working 3 pumps in each of them, and if any broke down, we had to supply its place while it was being patched up. For all our efforts, the eve of St. John's Day, the water in our ship rose so high that it was almost up to the deck. With great toil we continued in this state until daybreak, when we made a harbor in Jamaica named Puerto Bueno. This harbor was well protected, but had no source of fresh water, nor was there any Indian village in the vicinity. So, keeping afloat as well as we could, the next day we sailed eastward to another harbor named Santa Gloria that was enclosed with reefs. Having got in, since we were no longer able to keep the ships afloat, we ran them ashore as far as we could, grounding them close together board and board, and shoring them up on both sides so they could not budge. And the ships being in this position, the tide rose almost to the decks. Upon these and the fore and the stern castles we built cabins where the people could lodge, making our position as strong as possible so the Indians could do us no harm. For at that time the island was not yet inhabited or subdued by the Christians.